Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Tim Moen Show. Going hard in the paint. This is our 4th episode. And today I wanted to talk about some world events that are going on and how to think about them. What's going on in Ukraine? We have a Russian invasion. We have protests against the war. We have people in favor of supporting Ukrainians, saying we need to get over there and help them out in any way we can with gifts or donations or whatever. And there's a lot of moving pieces to this. So I have my old buddy Manuel Pasquale on to tell one side of the story here. And this side of the story, of course, Manuel is French Canadian who is very anti-war. He's never met a war that he liked. He hates them all. And we're going to find out today why he hates this Ukraine war and how we should think about it. So welcome, Manuel, to the Tim Moen Show. Glad to have you on.
Thank you, Tim.
So what should Canadians or just average people know about this war? I mean, here's what it looks like if I'm reading mainstream media correctly. Russia invaded the Ukraine. Ukraine is under attack. Russia is trying to assimilate them, and Ukraine just wants its independence. And so they're fighting tooth and nail, and we ought to fight them. We ought to help them, by God, against this evil Russian menace that has invaded them. Is this not correct, or what's wrong with this narrative?
First of all, if I can say, there's a quote who said, I don't know who, but that the war propaganda is probably the worst propaganda of all. If history proves us anything, it's that. Of course, we always knows it after the war, right. But if we look at all the previous war of the last 2 centuries, at the time, what the propaganda was telling us about why those wars were good, necessary, and justified, history always shows after war that it was a lot of lies. So, of course, right now there are events that we cannot know if it's true or not. Right. It's obvious that on both sides there are war crimes and evil acts committed. But if the propaganda is on one side, they will just report the war crime of the other side. They will amplify them, and they will shut off the war crime of their own side, which is always what has happened in the past. So.
Right. Well, and so let me kind of give folks out there listening what the libertarian view on war and national defense is, what the kind of traditional libertarian view is. The minarchist view, or the night watchman state, or there's essentially, I guess, 4 factions of libertarians out there, according to Walter Block, who is like a godfather of libertarianism. There are the classical liberals. There are the minarchists. There are the constitutionalists, and there are the anarcho-capitalists. Okay, now I fit into the anarcho-capitalist framework, but I'm sympathetic to all the other views. I think they're allies in the fight. Now, the typical minarchist view, or the view that the state has one job, and that is to protect the individuals within its borders, and that includes enforcing property rights and protecting the territory from invasion. Therefore, the military's job is not to go engage in wars of aggression overseas to, say, fight some unknown enemy or terrorist or whatever. It's not to go over there. It's to defend the borders from invasions. Yeah. It's not to engage in peacekeeping. It's not to engage in nation building. It's not to spread democracy or freedom around the world. It has one job, and that job is to protect our borders from invasion from an invading army or force. Now, so therefore we apply the non-aggression principle, thou shalt not initiate force to nations here. And we say, thou shalt not initiate force against a nation. Now, from just an establishment perspective, it does appear that Russia has initiated force against Ukraine, and therefore Ukraine has every right to defend itself from that invasion. Is that
Let's
right?
look at this.
Okay.
In fact, I have my position rests on two main arguments. But just before I say that, I always want to do a small disclaimer. It's clear that I'm not a supporter of Vladimir Putin. He's a statist, an ex-KGB guy, and
well, and I'm glad you said that, because it does seem like a lot of people that are skeptical of what's going on over in Ukraine, and let's say the U.S. and Canadian military industrial complex support for this war. A lot of people that are against this are actually big fans of Putin. So I'm glad you distinguished yourself and said, look, no, I'm not a fan of this guy at all. He's ex-KGB. He's a killer. He's one of the worst people.
One of the problems is that when you talk with someone, a lot of people have a very binary way of thinking. It's either the good or the evil. So for them, the Ukrainians are the poor, good innocents, and the Russians are the evil, demoniacal, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And the fact, if you don't support their position, automatically they will say that you're on the opposite. For example, you know that I'm a World War II revisionist, but for all people, as soon as you say that, they think that you support Hitler and that you're a fan of the regime, which is stupid. But it's the same thing again. That's why I have to make a small disclaimer. I'm not a fan of Putin. As I said, he's an ex-KGB guy, and his regime in Russia is not a libertarian, minarchist nation state.
And let me ask you this, Manuel: should Russia have its armies inside Ukrainian borders?
I'm coming to that.
Okay.
Yeah, of course. Also, I want to say I'm not a full expert on the history of Russia and Ukraine. I'm more specialized on World War II, but I think I know more than the average normie on that. Because but if people want good reference for the war in Ukraine right now, I would suggest to listen to Ron Paul and to Scott Horton of Anti-War. I think they are right now the two best person you can have a reference to in the libertarian.
Absolutely.
So I have two main arguments. My first argument is the moral, the libertarian moral principle, which is the non-aggression principle and property right. So from that argument, it's very simple. I cannot support anything Russia does because it violates that principle. Russia uses conscription, taxation, inflation, censorship, and they have collateral damage. So they kill innocent Ukrainian civilians. It's impossible to support that. But I have to be fair. I have to condemn equally what the Ukrainian government has done to the citizen of Crimea and Donbass.
Right.
We have to be fair. In the statist paradigm, we try to apply. I mean, it's not. We're not even for that argument. I'm not even in the statist paradigm. I'm on the individual level. So the Ukrainian government that Putin calls the Kiev regime is committed war crime and evil stuff against first its own citizen by forcing them into conscription. If you're a male in Ukraine, you don't have the right to escape the country. You have to stay there and be enslaved into a war.
Right.
That's totally evil.
Absolutely.
I don't see the difference between those two guys fundamentally. So I cannot support morally that. Now, my second argument is in the statist paradigm, in the conflict of two nation states. We have to face what are the facts. But as I said, war propaganda is always the worst. So, and we know if our government and media are against Russia, history will prove, if it's like 99% of the previous war, that they lied. Right. So now, okay, the facts of the statist paradigm. But first of all, my conclusion, I will give it right now, is that Russia was provoked by US and NATO. So in the paradigm, I will say that Russia has the moral high ground. Moral high ground doesn't mean that it's morally correct what they do. I just said that in the conflict between in the imperialist conflict between, let's say, Russia and US NATO, I'm forced to admit that Russia has the moral high ground. The same way I would say that during both World War, Germany had the moral high ground against the Ally. Not that I support German imperialism or their war crime, but in the statist paradigm between nation state, someone has the moral high ground, which is maybe the kind of lesser evil of the two, the one that was provoked or encircled.
All right. Well, explain to me why, how NATO provoked Russia.
First of all, in the 90s, the US promised Russia that NATO would not expand east of Germany. They did not respect that, obviously. In 2014, the US installed a puppet regime that was hostile to Russia in Ukraine. I think it was the evil woman, Victoria Nuland. And she said, I think they spent billions of dollars to install the regime that is hostile to Russia, which is clearly provocation. Also, the U.S. is clearly the most aggressive imperialist power in the world right now. They have, 700 or 800 military bases all over the world outside of their border. I don't think it's the case of Russia. So Russia is mostly encircled by U.S. military, and it's not the opposite. Russia doesn't have any military base around the U.S. And we all know, let's be honest, if Russia or China would make a military alliance with Canada or Mexico, Canada would have been bombed to ash, I think. Since a long time, we would have been attacked by the U.S.
Sure.
Never the U.S. would have. In fact, in 1962, when the Russian installed missiles in Cuba, the U.S. freaked out. They didn't like it. They threatened to start a war. And I can say that in the paradigm, I can understand the U.S. didn't like Russia to install missile in Cuba, but the U.S. with their hypocrisy, what they don't tell us is that the reason why Russia removed its missile in Cuba in 1962 is because the U.S. had agreed to remove its missile in Turkey at the same time. So again, the U.S. was the one who provoked the thing in the first place. So yes, my position in the statist paradigm is that Russia was provoked by U.S. NATO, and I really think that had U.S. not done all those provocations, Russia would not have invaded Ukraine.
Right.
So that's my position.
Okay, that's fair. I think I take a slightly different or maybe more nuanced position. I can't remove agency from Russia here by saying that they had no choice but to say respond to provocations by invading Ukraine. Mm-hmm. I think they Putin and Russia has to be held accountable. At least, or we have to make sure we assign blame to the proper spot. Just like for example, I would agree that 9/11 was in a big part. It was blowback for U.S. foreign policy, right? We had Osama bin Laden. We had the U.S. creating all sorts of enemies, and it was largely inevitable that one of these terrorists would do something like blow up the World Trade Centers, fly planes into them or whatever. That does not excuse or justify what these bastards did, right? I mean, they still killed innocent lives. They still have that on their blood. The U.S. is guilty of killing innocents over there. Osama bin Laden and his ilk are guilty of destroying innocent lives over here. They're both evil in that sense. And so Russia's evil for invading Ukraine, even given the provocations that the U.S. and the military industrial complex and NATO has done. So my view is basically this: that NATO has done, and the US and Canada it seems to me they have done everything they can to throw the Ukrainian people under the bus by provoking, by creating an environment that was likely to result in a Russian invasion. That was, you don't go poking bears and expect that they're not going to do anything, right? Eventually, when you poke that bear, tease that bear, do whatever, it's going to rear its ugly head. That bear is still evil, but hey, maybe don't. It's almost like they wanted this war, like NATO wanted this war. Now, why would NATO want this war? Why would they want perpetual war? Why would they want a perpetual war of terror? Why would they want why would they want to make all sorts of money, Emmanuel? Why would they want to increase their power, Emmanuel? Why would they, So that's kind of my take on this. It's like they want this.
Mm-hmm. But clear for me, the U.S. is a dying empire.
Sure,
the U.S. dollar is dying. I think they need to divert. They need something to divert, because the inflation we have, and that we're going to continue to have, obviously, they need they need someone to put the blame on. They had COVID. Now they have Putin. Okay, right. They're not gonna say, "Oh, we have inflation," because since two generations, we print money in order to buy election and to offer so-called free stuff and have an empire. That's why we have inflation. No, they're not gonna say that. They're gonna need a boogeyman like COVID, climate change, or now they have Putin, which I think is the best boogeyman. So. Yeah, the U.S. I think they want to feed the military-industrial complex. I think it's a racket that exists for over a century. And I think the U.S. also want Russia to be weak, because Russia and China are the two after the U.S. I think they are the largest possible military power, and the U.S. want to be the strongest, so they attack. They want to weaken their opponent. That's an imperialist rivalry, and that's what we have when we have a state. That's why we have to fight against statism. Right. And I just want to come back to something you said, that because when we talk about war, we are in the paradigm of the nation state, and as libertarian, we have to, for that, we're more in the minarchist paradigm than the anarchist.
Yeah.
So a minarchist government that libertarian would support, when you say it has to protect the border, you're right. I agree with that. The minarchist government should protect its citizen, their private property, but a government should better protect their citizens is to not provoke abroad, and our government do exactly the contrary. It's like World War II. People think, oh, the Japanese attacked suddenly Pearl Harbor in 1941. Ooh, I don't know why. Oh, maybe it's because the U.S. had put on them an oil embargo and many other things. Germany and Japan were small, tiny, industrialized nation with no colonies, with not enough resource probably to be self-sufficient, and everybody around them was having huge empire and doing protectionism in the 1930s and encircling them, especially Germany. I mean, not supporting imperial or Japan or Nazi Germany, but I don't think that a minarchist, a libertarian government by, like, say, a Ron Paul or I think it was Robert Taft in the 1940s would have done such provocation.
Right.
So our government don't protect us. They do exactly the opposite of protecting us. They go, as you said, they go poking a bear.
Well, right. And I mean, this is one of the reasons why I'm an anarchist, right? Is because I understand governments are born in conquest and plunder. I mean, we have all this myth about the creation of government and what its purpose is, but at the end of the day, it's a criminal gang. It does criminal things, and we can't expect it to be anything other than criminal. It only can exist through its criminality, through extorting its people, from plundering them, from imposing conquest on them, from and everything that emerges from it. Anyways,
the reality right now in Ukraine, because objectively, as you know, the nation state, the government, it's an abstraction. There's a conflict between U.S. politicians and all their cronies with Russian politicians and all their cronies, and the U.S. have their puppets. They have puppets. The Ukrainian and European politicians and their cronies are mostly the puppets.
Well, so let's talk about that a little bit. So I know maybe you can fill me in a little bit here, but Hunter Biden was working for Burisma, a Ukrainian oil company, as a consultant. Not that he knew anything about oil.
About that for me, I saw memes of Hunter Biden that were funny with his drug stuff or with his laptop, but
okay, so you don't know anything about it.
I'm absolutely not surprised, but me, I prefer I'm not a good person to.
Well, I mean, it calls into question a lot. We know there's fuckery going on, right?
Of course.
We know that Hunter Biden, he was cozied up with this Ukrainian oil company, even though he has no oil thing. Obviously, they were paying him obscene sums of money because of who his father is. And so there was that relationship they had with, the cronies from the United States that, enslave and shake down the U.S. citizens, were cozying up to the cronies in Ukraine who, shake down and oppress Ukrainian citizens. It's no surprise. And so, there's these relationships that the Bidens have with Ukraine, also with China as well, that are suspect. It makes you wonder how this is all connected, right? And then I remember that, Trump was, I think, accused of wanting a quid pro quo. He wanted the Ukrainian, I think, justice minister or something like that to release some files about their investigation into Burisma and into this Biden connection, if they wanted to get the foreign aid that they were promised. And of course, the progressives made a big song and dance about this and said, Trump's withholding promised foreign aid. Look at this corruption and collusion, and he's trying to strong arm the Ukrainians. And that's exactly, it distracted from the fact that the Bidens were doing exactly what the progressives were accusing Trump of doing. And obviously there was some quid pro quos going on there. So, and then you add into that, Manuel, the fact that you have this coup that occurred in 2014 that has all the hallmarks of a CIA or U.S. foreign policy provocation going on there. You have, the fact that Zelensky had an opportunity. So imagine you're the president of Ukraine, and you've got these two regions, Crimea and Donbass, where the people have voted overwhelmingly that they want to be part of Russia, that they are ethnic Russians. They see themselves as part of the Russian nation. They don't see themselves as Ukrainians. Okay. I don't know what the right thing to do in that situation is, but I know that if it'll end the killing with my people, if I just cede those two territories to Russia and broker a peace, why wouldn't I do that?
Exactly. In fact, I see three outcomes of this war. The Ukrainian people will either be ruled and exploited by either Russian or Ukrainian corrupt politician. It's the two outcomes. But there's a third outcome that is, I think, even worse. They could all be nuked out of existence.
Yes.
which is a lot more terrible. And what's kind of enraged me, and that you were talking about the so-called progressives, the woke people. Those people are totally insane. I mean, most of those people probably, I mean, those people support that our government send help to Ukraine. They support that. But most of them probably don't know anything about the history of Ukraine.
Well, a lot of them actually want our militaries to go over there and back up Ukraine. You know, it's as if they want the world to blow up in one giant nuclear blast, right?
Most of them would have been unable to locate Ukraine on a map before 2022. But those people are insane enough that they prefer to do their virtue signaling about supporting Ukraine with their Ukrainian flag on their social media profile. They prefer virtue signaling about that. They care more about virtue signaling than the possibility of a nuclear war that could kill them. Right. It's all brainwash. I mean, those people are. Anything that can stop the war, I think, is a good thing. It's always, I mean, for a Ukrainian, of course, I would wish them to be free under the best possible political regime they can have. Ideally, no government, but they're better to be alive under, let's say, a regime that is a puppet of Russia, like they probably had before 2014, and be alive. And having no war, and having access to internet, being able, I don't know, to buy Bitcoin if they want online, to immigrate abroad, to travel in Eastern Europe. No, now they are at war for what? To decide if maybe it's going to be the Zelensky regime allied with NATO that will rule and exploit them instead.
Right.
That's totally crazy.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, I really feel for the Ukrainian people here, because it seems like there's no good way out of this. It's just like, what kind of oppression do you want, and how bad do you fight for the lesser evil? Like, how many bodies do you pile up so that you get the lesser evil? At what point is there enough bodies to say you've got the lesser evil? You know, Jimmy Dore had an interesting rant on it, and I don't know how much truth there is to it, but he's basically said, look, the reason Zelensky isn't doing the obvious things that would get peace, that would end this war or bring these hostilities to an end, like cede Donbass and Crimea, for example, is that the extreme right, the literal Nazis in Ukraine have issued a very credible death threat against him. They would literally kill him. He knows this, and he would die. So Zelensky, you know, Jimmy Dore's explanation for why Zelensky hasn't done the obvious thing and brokered a peace for his people is that he knows it would be his death if he did that, because the Nazis in his country would literally kill him if they did that. But I have no idea, you know, if that's true. But it just tells me that, like, this is part of the problem we're facing here, is that there's so many different angles to this. There's so many different stories that are going on. There's so much information, so much fake news, so much spin propaganda coming out of there. It's hard to know exactly what to make of it. But we go back to principle here and we say, okay, what should our government be doing about it here in Canada? Well, the libertarian answer is nothing. It's not, Russia is not invading us. Nope. You know, we don't extort our own taxpayers. We don't point a gun at people and say, I'm going to shoot you and kill you if you don't give me money to support Ukrainians. We don't do that. We consider that immoral. If you really are serious about supporting Ukrainians, if you're really serious about repelling this Russian invasion, what you do is you fund your own way over there. You get on a plane, you stand there shoulder to shoulder with Ukrainians that are defending their property and their lives, and you start killing Russians and put your own body in harm's way. That's what you do.
I wouldn't do that.
I wouldn't do that either. I'm not ready to do that. And I'm certainly not ready to kill Canadians for not willingly sacrificing their money for a war they don't even properly understand. So, yeah, there we are.
The solution I see is that the first and best solution would be to stop provoking those mess.
Yeah.
And that people have to understand that all those mess are caused by government interventions, and that more government intervention is not a solution. It will only create more problem in the future. And right now we face the possible unintended consequence of a third world war with nuclear weapon, and we all know what it could mean. It could mean that we could be literally killed, whether it's in a nuclear blast or with the afterward. And as I said, the fact that most people prefer to virtue signal rather than be afraid of that is totally, I mean
yeah. Well, and I mean,
that's what scares me the most.
Let's look at NATO, right? I mean, why do we need NATO anymore? What good has NATO done in the past 30 years? Well, let's go down the list. We've got our NATO allies going into Iraq and trying to suck us into there. We've got NATO allies bringing us into Afghanistan, creating a hellhole in both Afghanistan and Iraq, by the way. Our latest thing was NATO bringing us, into Libya to get rid of that evil regime there, Gaddafi.
Didn't work.
And we end up with even more violent and evil extremists running that country and open goddamn slave markets in that country. I mean, how many more bodies need to be piled up to create global war before we realize that NATO might not be the solution to our problems here? NATO might not be the good guy.
No, but NATO is an imperialist alliance. I'm sorry. Again, in the paradigm of the nation state, I'm ready to accept what we would call defensive alliance. It's totally, I think, acceptable in the status paradigm. But if you want to have a real, from a libertarian standpoint, in the status paradigm, if we want to have defensive alliance, the alliance first, you cannot be imperialistic. You cannot have a defensive alliance with some imperialist nation, because they will drag you into imperialism. So right. I would agree with a purely defensive alliance, but NATO is not that. NATO is imperialistic. NATO existed after the Second World War. Why? Because they said that the Soviet Union was a threat. Yeah, but the same people that say that were the ones that saved and supported and helped the Soviet Union to expand in 1945.
Yeah.
By the allies of the Second World War helped Stalin, they helped Mao Zedong, and after 1945 they said, "Oh, communism is expanding everywhere." Yeah, you fucking stupid! You helped them, you gave them money. You Churchill who signed paper with Stalin saying, "Hey, you can have that," and but now we need NATO. I mean, how people can be, I'm sorry, but if you believe NATO should never have existed, I think.
Well, I mean, look, let's just go back to Libya again for a second, right? It was our country's decision to join NATO in bombing Libya that provoked 2 terrorist attacks on our soil. One was a gunman going into Parliament and shooting up Parliament after killing Nathan Cirillo standing guard at a war memorial. Another was a guy who ran over 2 Canadian soldiers in a parking lot in Quebec. Again, both of these guys cited Canada's involvement in the Libya bombings, in the Libya regime change for the breaking point. They're like, enough. And so again, nothing excuses what those terrorists did. Those were murders, cold-blooded. Those people ought to be executed for their crimes, in my opinion. Well, I think one was by that brave old guy in Parliament there who did a diving shot and tooked him.
Sorry if I don't feel. I probably have a different feeling than you toward toward police, military, especially when they defend politicians. I would not incite anyone to do violence like that. But personally, if a terrorist wants to do evil things, which I'm not supporting, I prefer that he does it against government official and their mercenaries, if they want, rather than innocent civilians. I'm sorry to say that.
Well, that's a fair point, but they're murderers. They're evil people that should be removed from the face of the earth, and I have no problem with executing.
Well, I will not try. I will not try either the death of those terrorists.
But again, these murders likely would not have happened had NATO not got involved with NATO. So in what way was bombing Libya in Canada's best interest? What way did that help Canada out? It certainly stole taxpayer dollars from Canadian taxpayers and funneled them into bombs that exploded lives in Libya. That hurt Canadians. It provoked terrorist attacks. So it's not clear to me exactly how NATO is helping Canada out here.
It also provoked the migrant crisis.
Right. The migrant crisis.
Europe is overwhelmed with immigrant, and I don't blame individually those people. In an ideal libertarian society, I think that everyone should be free to go wherever they want. But in the statist paradigm, with a welfare state and a mob rule democracy, I'm not on the side of open border. Let's be fair. In a libertarian society where everything's private property, movement for bad guys will be very restricted, and movement for good guys will be very open, because private property owners generally will let good guys on their property and not bad guys, right? If you own a road, or if you own a commons, or if you own, whatever. So anyways, the idea that governments are, but this is just it. On one hand, you're going to get the conservative who's like, we got to bomb them terrorists, and then that creates a migrant crisis, and then we got to close them borders. I mean, you're working against your own interests. Anyway, Manuel, we've been going at this for over half an hour now. Any last thoughts before we but no, I think I have said what I wanted to say. I'm curious to see what anger I will have provoked among your listener, because I know that even among libertarians, I know that a lot of people don't agree with what I say. So, but I hope that we can maybe have. If I have helped people to maybe open their mind and move them a little bit toward the non-intervention position, I'm glad about that. And I thank you very much for allowing me to have this conversation with you.
Right. Well, I mean, if you get down to it, if we get outside the binary thinking here, I'm not sure you've said anything that controversial, really. I mean, you've said, look, Russia shouldn't be invading Ukraine. That's bad. NATO shouldn't be engaged in fuckery and provocation of Russia and destabilizing that region. That's bad. Also, maybe NATO and the US and the CIA and various agencies and politicians shouldn't be engaged in fuckery in the Ukrainian government. Maybe it shouldn't be involved in coups and different things like that. That's bad. All those things are bad. And I think what you're arguing is that, maybe our tax dollars shouldn't be going to support the fuckery that's going on. And maybe if you want to defend Ukraine, you should put your life and your money where your life is, where your mouth is, and actually show that you support them by, here's an idea. Let's take in some Ukrainian refugees. Let's house them in our houses. Let's donate to these good causes that promote. Let's go over there, and donate money to people that are defending their property and their lives and their home over there, if you think that's a good idea. But let's keep our governments out of it, because nothing good can happen from our governments getting involved in this. Would that be a fair way to kind of summarize?
The statist people are often, generous. We often say that statist people, leftists, are often generous with others people money.
Of course.
In the case of war, they go even farther than that in their crazy mindset. They're generous with others people's money, because the people that support
Right.
The war from the Ukrainians,
And they're generous with other people's lives. They don't
yeah,
give a
they're
fuck if
generous with the
you
life
get blown to bits.
of themselves, because in order to do their virtue signaling, they're ready to have a lot of Ukrainian killed in
Yeah.
order for maybe Ukraine to be ruled by Zelensky instead of probably Putin's puppet.
Hey,
That
Manuel, it's
yeah.
a small price to pay to signal my virtue that of what a good person I am. Right?
Yeah.
Anyways, okay. Well, my heart goes out to the people in Ukraine,
Me too.
and I wish that we had some
And
clear solution here.
Ukrainian civilians.
You know, I wish it were as easy as Canada just dropping billions of dollars in foreign aid or something like that. And unfortunately, I don't think it is. I think it's Canadian and U.S. involvement in this is only likely to make the problem worse. And that's been borne out historically throughout the past century or so of absolute warfare propped up by central bankers and the ruling oligarchs and different things like that. And so appealing to these same people to help out Ukraine after they're the same people that basically threw them to the wolves and are cheering for their slaughter is probably wrong.
It's always better to be alive than be dead. But the virtue signaling people are too dumb and too brainwashed to get that.
Fair enough. Awesome. Manuel, thanks so much for joining us. And folks, if you want to hear more conversations like this, or by the way, if you totally disagree with Emmanuel and I are saying here, I want to have you on the show. I want to hear what you have to say. So reach out to me, tim.moen@me.com. I'll have you on. If you want to debate Manuel, and you guys can go at it and I'll moderate. Hey, happy to have you on. If you like conversations like this, you want to hear more of them, and you want to hear more about pushing the paradigm, the status quo. You want to hear more controversial stuff. I'm on 2 free speech platforms out there, Rumble and locals.com. You can support me over at Locals. Manuel said he had some issues trying to support me. I'm going to get that fixed. You know, for the price of a cup of coffee a month, you can help promote these kind of conversations, keep me going, help pay for my time to do this, and the equipment that I use and the guests that I need to reach out to get to. It all takes time and energy. I want to do this rather than work overtime for my socialist healthcare system. So you can help by coming over to Locals and supporting me. Anyways, this is Tim Moen signing off from the Tim Moen Show. Thank you so much for joining us.